Welcome to part 2 of Labor Pains and Sunday Laws. If you haven't seen part 1, please pause this and watch the first episode for context. But if you've already seen it, let's go ahead and get started. I want to start today by asking you a bunch of questions, and I really want you to think about it. Why were Seventh-day Adventists arrested and placed in chain gangs in the late 1880s? Why would Christians who say that one man esteems one day and another man esteems another day keep these men in chains? Why would Christians who say that the Sabbath is done away with by saying that we're no longer under the law but under grace pass laws to have these men arrested? Why would Christians who say that the law is done away with by quoting, "Let no man judge you in meat and drinks and Sabbath days," end up judging people in a civil court of law to the extent that they would have them arrested and placed in chains? And why are some Christians actively trying to not just protect, but also promote reverence for Sunday, when many Christians have spent decades claiming that it doesn't matter what day we worship on?
Friday is for Muslims, Saturday for Jews, Sunday for Christians.
Take your day.
Take your day, okay.
These are the questions that boggle my mind. I mean, honestly, is it just me? Or is it becoming clear that maybe, just maybe, the men and women who are pushing for special treatment for Sunday don't really believe that the law is done away with, but instead, they believe that the law has been changed and they want to force others to honor that change? And to make my point, I'm going to give you 10 L's. Are you ready? All right, here we go. Perhaps all of the accusations that Sabbath keepers are the legalistic ones are not really legitimate. Because what's more legalistic, preaching and teaching that God wants us to honor the seventh-day Sabbath, or trying to use the government to legally legislate a legal law to make businesses liable for labor on Sundays so that people can keep the trans Sabbath? And I don't know about you, but all of that sounds very legalistic to me. But nonetheless, here we are with people trying to pass labor laws. And there we were with Sabbath keepers breaking those labor laws. And those Sabbath keepers found themselves in chains for the crime of working on the so-called Lord's Day. And the question I want to answer is why? And here's the answer. There's a deep theological framework that is driving and drove this mindset in the past. And we started to take a look at this in the previous episode. And we will unpack a little more of this today. It goes all the way back to the ideas that were promoted in this book. It wanted to show that this is what was best for the common good of society. In this book, Wilbur makes the case that the Sunday Sabbath is essential not only for religious observance, but also as a civil institution that protects the working man's rights to rest and shields society from the tyranny of ceaseless labor. In his book, Wilbur quotes from the speech of a trade unionist named Mr. Broadhurst, who said, "To those who live in a ceaseless life of toil, the Sunday is that which the cooling stream in the desert is to a weary traveler." A cooling stream, so poetic, but so wrong. In another place, he included this quote from a man named W.H. Ryder, who said, "Sabbath laws are justified in a republic on the ground of self-preservation. They are also justified by divine command and by the experience of mankind. They are justified because Sunday is the poor man's day of rest, which neither wealth nor wickedness has the right to take away. They are justified upon the principle that the privilege of rest for each citizen depends upon the observance of a day of rest by all citizens." In essence, the case was being made here that Sundays should be protected because this is a day of rest for the laborer so that he will not be run down by big business. This exact sentiment was expressed by another very important person during the late 1800s, and it was none other than Pope Leo XIII, from who the most recent Pope, Pope Leo XIV, has potentially been inspired by. Now, I don't know about you, but all of this feels like deja vu all over again. In his 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum on capital, and you guessed it, labor, Pope Leo XIII had this to say about labor rights and Sunday rest. In section 40, it says, "The working man too has interests in which he should be protected by the state. And first of all, there are the interests of his soul." And in section 41, it goes on to say, "From this follows the obligation of the cessation from work and labor on Sundays and certain holy days, The rest from labor is not to be understood as mere giving way to idleness. Much less must it be an occasion for spending money and for vicious indulgence, as many would have it to be. But it should be rest from labor, hallowed by religion. In other words, Pope Leo XIII is making the case that Sunday is to be used not just as a day of rest, but that it is also a day that should be hallowed with religion. And he said this while ignoring the fact that God did not hallow the first day of the week, but the seventh day of the week. It's almost as if he was presuming to have the authority to change times and laws. Everyone was thinking the same thing, whether it was the NRA, Pope Leo XIII, Wilbur Crafts, or Henry Blair. All of these men and entities from the late 1880s were all thinking the same thing, which was that Sunday must be protected in the name of religion and in the name of God. And today, Christian nationalists and the author of the labor section of the Project 2025 documents are thinking the same thing. And it seems as though Pope Leo XIV may be interested in continuing this work, because as this article puts it, Vatican spokesperson Matteo Bruni said the choice of the name Leo was a clear and deliberate reference to the last pope named Leo. Leo XIII was elected in 1878 and was best known for his 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, which outlined workers' rights. And remember, they brought it up, not me. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But what's more pressing today is to understand what lies at the foundation of all of this past and present rhetoric. What is really driving this movement to protect and honor Sunday? To find that out, let's take a look at another encyclical letter written by Pope Leo XIII entitled Immortale Dei. This encyclical is extremely important because it sets the stage for the principles relating to the image of the beast by outlining a theological framework that was embraced during the late 1880s by men like Wilbur Crafts, and the same theological principles are in place today.
Washington, D.C. has been awash with treacherous displays of vice and vanity. The city is enshrouded by darkness and a lack of warmth.
And yet, it is crucial to recognize that this domain belongs to Christ the King, and it is our mandate to plant a flag in the heart of it, declaring the truth that Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, to whom all people and nations should bow and swear their allegiance. Ours should be the bold ambition to claim Washington, D.C. for Christ and disciple it, to once again walk in the ways of God.
In this encyclical, Pope Leo had the following to say about the relation between the church and state. There was once a time when states were governed by the philosophy of the gospel. Then it was that the power and divine virtue of Christian wisdom had diffused itself throughout the laws, institutions, and morals of the people, permeating all ranks and relations of civil society, and church and state were happily united in concord and friendly interchange of good offices. I hope you're catching this. This is what these men are looking for, an intersection of church and state. Leo XIII goes on to say this: many indeed are they who have tried to work out a plan of civil society based on doctrines other than those approved by the Catholic Church. In other words, from Leo XIII's perspective, the state, and by extension society, cannot function properly without the doctrines that have been approved by the Catholic Church. And he says this because he believed, and many still believe, that the Catholic Church is the one true church, and that God has given her the full authority to guide the consciences of humanity. One of the extensions of this thinking is that part of the government's God-ordained purpose is to protect man, to protect the worker, and the belief is that this can be done by securing for him a rest from his labor pains by protecting the so-called Sunday Sabbath. Because of this, Pope Leo XIII was fully on board with utilizing labor unions to achieve some of these goals. He said as much in Rerum Novarum when he wrote, "The most important of all are working men's unions. Such unions should be suited to the requirements of this our age, an age of wider education, of different habits, and of far more numerous requirements in daily life. It is gratifying to know that there are actually in existence not a few associations of this nature, consisting either of workmen alone or of workmen and employers together." You see, There's something for everyone. Labor unions for the liberals and religious laws for the conservatives. This is why in Revelation 13, we see the use of the mark in the hand and in the forehead. The forehead represents the frontal lobe, where people will accept this law and these movements as ordained of God and necessary for the moral good of society. And there will also be an acceptance for the social good of society that is represented by the mark being received in the hand. Either way, there will eventually be a unified push coming from both sides of the aisle for the legislation of this day. According to Revelation chapter 13 and 16, this unity will ultimately culminate in signs and wonders being performed that will cement, or dare I say, seal, the decisions of men and women all over the world as they choose sides in this spiritual war. In the late 1800s, and even today, the Catholic Church and many Protestants have very similar goals and similar theories and theologies that are growing closer and closer together. This is why Ellen White had the following to say in The Great Controversy. The Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power, and under the influence of this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling on the rights of conscience. I want you to notice what was said in that statement. The premise is put forth that it will not be the Catholic Church that reaches over to Protestants, but the reality is that it will be the Protestants that reach over to grab hands and unite with the Catholic Church. All of this is going to happen again because it also happened in the late 1800s. And you can see it in this statement right here from the appendix of The Great Controversy that gives context to the movements that were taking place during that time. In speaking of the work of the National Reform Association, it says, "The National Reform theory is identical with that of the papacy. Therefore, the establishment of the National Reform theory in this government will be but the setting up of a living image of the papacy. Advocating, as these parties are, the papal theory, it is not to be wondered at that they are anxious to secure the cooperation of the papacy in carrying their scheme to success. The Christian Statesman is the official organ of the National Reform Association, and in an editorial, December 11, 1884, that paper said, 'We cordially, gladly recognize the fact that in South American republics and in France and other European countries, the Roman Catholics are the recognized advocates of national Christianity and stand opposed to all the proposals of secularism whenever they are willing to cooperate in resisting the progress of political atheism. We will gladly join hands with them.'" I hope you're picking up what's being laid down here. The Adventists during the late 1880s understood the theological framework that was undergirding the Sunday movement. They had a deeper and more elegant understanding of what was happening than just the Sunday law in and of itself. They understood that beneath all of this was a theory regarding the relation between church and state that had been established during the rule of the so-called Holy Roman Empire. And now, this flawed theology was making a resurgence, and it was this theology that sat at the foundation of the push for the protection and promotion of Sunday observance. Adventists in the late 1800s understood the dangers these ideas posed, and it drove them to launch a publication named the American Sentinel, which could be seen as the spiritual father of Liberty magazine. In the December 1887 edition of the publication, it said the following about the desire from Protestants to cooperate with the Catholic Church regarding the protection and observance of the Sunday Sabbath. It says, "The common interest of all religious people in the Sunday Sabbath ought both to strengthen our determination to work and our readiness to cooperate in every way with our Roman Catholic fellow citizens. We may be subjected to some rebuffs in our first proffers, and the time is not yet come when the Roman Church will consent to strike hands with other churches as such, but the time has come to make repeated advances and gladly to accept cooperation in any form in which they may be willing to exhibit it." This is exactly what Ellen White was talking about in that quote regarding reaching over to grasp hands with the Catholic Church. And now look at these statements during the labor pains of the late 1800s that were also recorded in the appendix of The Great Controversy that describes the movements of the NRA as in perfect accord with the encyclical of Pope Leo XIII from 1885, going on to say that therefore, as the purpose of the National Reform Association is identical with that of Rome, it is only to be expected that they should show a readiness to gladly join hands. And whenever Protestantism gains control of the civil power, whether with or without the aid of Rome, that will be but to erect an image of the papacy. Adventists like A.T. Jones and E.J. Wagner, the editors of the American Sentinel, understood that this principle of trying to utilize the state in a manner that stepped outside the boundaries of freedom of conscience was to virtually establish the image of the papacy, also known as the image to the beast. You see, too often when we're reading Revelation 13 and 14, we only focus on the mark of the beast. We only focus on the Sunday law. But what about the image to the beast? Revelation 13 verses 14 and 15 states that they will make an image to the beast, that they had power to give life to the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should speak, and that those who do not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And in Revelation 14 verse 9 and 11, God warns against worshiping the beast and his image. In Revelation 15 verse 2, the Bible shows us that those who stand on the sea of glass must get the victory over the beast and over his image, in addition to the victory over the mark of his name. This means that our victory must include overcoming the mindset that we can control the consciences of other human beings. And by extension, that means we must get the victory over this mentality that God wants to use the state to control the morals of humanity. Because as I said in episode 1 of this series, God is a God of freedom, and he will not force us to rest or force us to worship on any day. And this, my friends, brings us full circle. In the beginning of this video, I asked several questions regarding why Seventh-day Adventists ended up arrested, serving in chain gangs for working on the so-called Sunday Sabbath. It's because they were violating the man-made law that was forcing them to rest on a day that God did not bless. And this understanding should not be overlooked. How does anyone have the right to force another man to rest? My position is that based on history and based on prophecy, this desire to force others to rest will ultimately lead to forcing others to worship. And this is why we need to be talking about this from now, and not waiting until Christian zealots take this coercion to its natural conclusion, which is to legislate worship. In the next and final episode of this series, we'll take another trip back in time, even further into the past, where we will find the foundation and the process of these labor laws and labor pains, and also the foundations of the theology that drives the desire among Christians to use the state to accomplish their goals. By doing this, we can get the full picture of where humanity has been and where humanity is heading. So if you haven't done so yet, subscribe and share this video, because we really have to do our part to get people to start thinking more deeply about these issues. So stay tuned, because unfortunately, the labor pains are about to get worse. God bless.